Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the OPPI Digital Knowledge Series in collaboration with IPA and IDMA. A big thank you to our OPPI members and a warm welcome to the members of IPA and IDMA who have joined us in large numbers today. The world is beginning to turn the page to write a new chapter on COVID-19. A chapter that will focus on how not only their lives are different today than they were yesterday, but also that the pandemic has changed how they will live their lives tomorrow and forever. The challenge for companies and businesses is to meet the evolving preferences of their consumers. As economies are slowly entering into the recovery phase, how will these evolving consumer sentiments determine the go-to-market approaches for brands? Welcome to this interesting episode of Understanding Consumer Sentiments during and post-COVID. Over to Mr. Satyanarayanan, Managing Director, Galderma South Asia, to set the context for today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavana. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third OPPI Digital Knowledge Webinar Series in collaboration with IP and IDMA. Our second webinar last Tuesday had received overwhelming response. I would like to thank all the attendees for making the webinar truly engaging. Moving from leadership during the COVID crisis, today we are focused on our consumer. If you recall, last week in our discussion, we discussed about 4 different phases every organization will go through during the COVID crisis. Every businesses, all the companies are in the rebound and reimagine phase and thinking how the consumers will change and respond to specific segment needs. It is inevitable that new normal will emerge. This includes changes in lifestyle, purchases, consequently shifts in the consumer behavior. We can already see some of these shifts, the shift towards consuming more digital, e-commerce and e-retailing, etc. Marketeers talk of consumer preferences. While the preferences are never easy to shape or change, COVID-19 seems to have changed the playing field for the marketeers. Almost overnight, hardcore mall goers have adopted to and switched to online commerce. Experiential buying has been replaced with virtual buying. Will this paradigm shift in the consumer behavior remain? What are the consumer sentiments in the post-COVID world? What about the healthcare consumers? Will pharmaceutical industry will undergo a massive digital transformation to meet the evolving needs of our patients and consumers? So these are the questions most of us have in your minds. While we may not have the answers for all of them, let's turn to our experts, Bain and Company, who can throw some light on the consumer sentiments in the post-COVID world. So let me welcome Nikhil Ojha, partner at Mumbai office, also leads Bain strategy practice in India and also is a member of Bain's consumer product practices. With over 20 years of consulting and industry experience in India and abroad, Nikhil works with large organizations to address corporate and business strategy, innovation, organization development, scenario planning, and performance improvement. Welcome, Nikhil. Our second expert of the day, Parijat Ghosh. Parijat is a partner based in New Delhi office. He leads the firm Asia Pacific Results Delivery Practice and also an expert in healthcare advanced manufacturing services practices. He has almost 20 years of management consulting experience throughout India, US, and also in Europe. Parijat advises the clients across number of sectors within the healthcare industry, including the payers, services, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and biotechnology. Welcome, Parijat. And I am sure during the course of the webinar, you will have questions. I request all the attendees to post the questions in the Q&A chat room. We have an exclusive Q&A section moderated by Mr. Sudarshan Jain, Secretary General of IPA, an industry veteran and a marketing expert himself. Over to the expert for yet another interesting, engaging and informative learning section. Over to you, Nikhil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satya, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually going to start the webinar content not by telling you anything, but by asking you a set of questions first. The first question of that is this: with respect to where you are today, what is your sense of COVID-19's impact in FY21 versus FY20 on your business? And let's just think about it in top line terms from now. On your screens, you should be able to choose one of the four options. If you expect a positive growth and upward trajectory, that's A. Flat versus last year is B. Contraction, but within 0 to 10% is C. And a significant more than 10% contraction is D. We have run this, poll across a number of CEO webinars that we've done. And so I'm very curious to see what this group's responses are in respect to what the FY21 expectations look like. Parijat, do you have? Yeah. Okay, so we've got one response right now. Any attendee can actually vote, and it would be great to get as many of you opine. All right, the tech of, I guess, downloading and responding is taking a little bit of time, but we can see that of the respondents that we have, it's 60% in terms of positive trajectory, and then equally split among the others between flat versus small or large degrowth.
If I may just intervene here, attendees are requested to please go to pollev.com as it's available on the slide here. Please type pollev.com on your phones and then type in the Bain cons, and you will be able to enter the poll and take the poll questions and survey. So please type pollev.com. Thank you.
It is interesting. I'm going to move on in the interest of time. Right now, the numbers that I'm seeing on the screen is again about 45% or so in growth, 33% on significant downturn, and then 10 and 20 for B and C. Here's something that I want to start with, though. This is obviously leading pharmaceutical and healthcare companies in the country, which is answering right now. If you look at what's happening in the rest of the economy, when we did this with about 300 CEOs across sectors, the numbers were 13%, which expected upward trajectory. And of course, there were pharma people and healthcare people in that group also. There were 15% people who were expecting a flat trajectory versus FY20. So, only about 30% who were expecting any positive numbers in this FY21. 30% which were 0 to 10% degrowth, and 40% which were greater than 10% degrowth. So that's the backdrop in which you are entering the post-lockdown period. If we go on to the next slide. This is what the backdrop really is, and many of you might have seen this on 1st of April in The Economist. where the x-axis talks about how much fiscal stimulus is being released by the government, and the y-axis is how strict was the response that the government did with respect to the lockdown. And as you can see, India is a bookend case on both aspects. It implemented one of the strictest lockdown around the world, and for various reasons, it actually did not release any significant fiscal stimulus. We updated the data on 27th of April, so this is towards the end of April, and still on neither of those axes had the movement been anything of significance. And that's really the reason why our reaction and our prospects going forward are what they are. Moving on to the next slide. This is a really harsh situation for most of the consumers and most of the population in the country because of three aspects of what you see on the screen right now. Number one, we have done extensive work in profiling all of the 30 crore households that are there in the country. If you take an income cut, which is the first column, low income is what we classify as all households which earn less than 20,000 rupees a month or 2.5 lakh rupees a year. Lower mid is from 20,000 to 40,000, i.e. 2.5 to 5 lakh rupees per annum per household. And then upper mid and a high income. As you can see, most of our population is concentrated in the bottom two rows, which is 76% of the population. Low income and lower mid income. The second aspect that I'll draw your attention to is the central column, which is the consumption expenditure. Our economy is 60% household consumption. So if you look at the GDP composition of our country, it's 60% domestic consumption, which is a very important input into what the overall outcomes are going to be like. Now, where does this household consumption come from? Not from the households of people who are attending or presenting on this webinar. It comes from the lower two rows. 66% of the aggregate consumption in the economy is from the low income and the lower middle income households. And the third aspect that I want to just draw your attention to are the donuts on the right-hand-most column, where you'll see that the gray portion of the donuts are self-employed households. And in the bottom two rows, you'll also see significant green portions, which are casual wage labor. So you can see that even if I just read from the bottom, 52% of the low income, 51% of the lower mid, 54% of the upper mid, 66% of the high income households are self-employed in this country. This is what it leads to the fragility of the demand recovery in our country, which all of us need to be absolutely cognizant of over the next 6, 9, 12 months, that when you are a self-employed or a casual wage person, 45 days of being locked down essentially means that you have absolutely no income coming in those 45 days. Yes, there are always exceptions. The 66% of the top row also includes the doctors and the lawyers and all that stuff, and maybe a little bit of few of them have some income coming in, but on the aggregate the picture is actually very, very bad. Importantly, if you look at the savings column, which is the second last column, you'll see how fragile the saving situation is because unsurprisingly, the low-income household doesn't, is not able to save much. Neither is the lower middle income household. And so if you are self-employed or casual wage, you have been locked down. You have essentially run through all of your savings in the 45-day period. When it reopens, and especially given the uncertainty around, how long the COVID problem is going to last, you're going to be in a situation where you'll want to rebuild your savings first before you go out and start re-spending as you did. So that fragility is very important, and that's why our recovery is going to be different than China, because China, 85% of the population or the households are not self-employed or casual wage. Their self-employment ratio is 15%, 15%. When you have a salary, it's easier to both save as well as restart spending. That's the macro backdrop that you should absolutely be aware of. Because before we move on to some micro elements, remember that in most of our working lives, there comes a few occasions when the macro overwhelms the micro. We are in the middle of such a situation, and therefore, whatever you decide to do or you choose to do, you have to be cognizant of the backdrop much more than in a normal situation where you say that the backdrop is what it is. I will be the master of my own destiny and I'll chart my path going forward. That situation is going to be a few months away still. Moving on, we have been doing this spot checks every week with 2,500 household. You can see that over the course of the different weeks of April, and we now have the first week of May results also out. Over the 4 weeks of April, there was a significant spend decline across different income classes, which I'll talk about. But importantly, how much time people were expecting that it will take to return to financial normalcy kept on deteriorating as the weeks went by. Next. If we think about the trend of declining spend, it started by a number of people where the spend decline wasn't significant, but that also was half already in the first week where the decrease happened. That half was actually on the right hand side, you'll see 43% of that was access driven, and only 33 plus 15 was about income or future uncertainty. By the fourth week of April, 2/3 of the decline was on account of current income drop or future uncertainty, and only 1/3 remained in terms of access. Moving forward, this is the point about the first week of May, where there has been a slight uptick in terms of the categories. Now that's because there's a difference between what's happening in the red zone and what's happening in the green and orange zone. As green and orange zones have seen resumption of access and the shops reopening, there has been an uptick in demand or uptick in consumption versus the previous week. That's not surprising. But what is absolutely important is that the drivers of decrease in consumption remains the same and has been even slightly worsened versus week 3, as you will see on the right-hand chart. 34 plus 31, 65% of the decrease in consumption is because of either current income or future uncertainty, and there is a degree of downgrade that's become endemic across the 4 weeks of or the 5 weeks of this work happening. There's a more detailed article on this in today's Times of India for those who are more interested in more details, and you can have a look at that. But moving forward, one important point just in the numbers that I did want to make was that if you just look at the overall trend of declining spend, that started life as on the left-hand side of this slide, that started life as something that was driven by a lower income households and the lower middle income household. In week 1 of April, the high income households, which is the HI bar, only 23% of them, and mainly because of access, had decreased their spend. If you look at week 5, you'll see that it's low, lower mid, upper mid, high income. All of them are between 40 and 50% in terms of decrease of spend. That's what happens when you, as individual household, it's very difficult to project 4-6 weeks out in terms of thinking about what's actually happening. But when you see your own behavior, you see how much of a difference that is with respect to actual spending. And as I've emphasized on the right side, you see that even in the higher income household or the upper middle household, it is the current income and future uncertainty which is really the driver of the downgrade. The last thing that I want to talk about on the next page is these are the numbers, and the numbers are very important and will be very important for FY21. So please do take that into account. But you also have to look at sentiments in terms of what is top of mind for people. These are the insights that we've been tracking using some social media tools that are available to us. And as you can see, as both the pandemic and the lockdown exacerbated, then a number of elements with respect to the virus itself, risk reduction, etc., spiked. Importantly, also affiliation with national or social or other groups increased, and some of the things that we saw in other countries about specific anxieties, etc., that didn't come up with. Why do I want to bring this up is the following, that you are leaders in your industry at your firm, and your firm have an important role to play in the industry. Most habits and consumer behavior are actually very sticky. There comes but a few times in the course of the evolution of a firm or an industry when there is a significant enough external flux where how the habits reform after this episode is over is a to be determined thing. And my appeal to this group is going to be that as you think about what choices you make, you have to think very hard about what do I want the future consumer to actually behave like, and what can I do today to be able to steer them towards that behavior, rather than just wait and watch how things pan out, because wait and watch is going to make you into a significant follower with all its attendant disadvantage, versus actually seizing the moment and moving forward more purposefully towards a consumer behavior that is going to be beneficial for them, beneficial for the industry, and beneficial for your firm. Parijat.
Thank you, Nikhil. So as marketeers and as individuals, we all know that only a small fraction of all of the people who commit to making New Year resolutions really stick with them, 3 to 6 months out. Sustainable behavior, as Nikhil was saying, those changes are hard. What is also true is that behavior changes that happen in moments of truth are likely to be more sticky. And as we stand at the cusp of lockdown 3.0, we want to draw attention to 6 behaviors during the past weeks that could be game changers for the future. The first is the relative spending on healthcare during the duration, and tied to that is the speed of recovery. The third and the fourth are related to digital engagement by HCPs and patients during the lockdown, and what this could mean in terms of omni-channel engagement with HCPs and connected care with patients in the future. The last two are related to the backdrop and the economic fragility and potential austerity measures by households regarding downtrading and choices that they make between quality and value. To start off, let us look at how consumers and households have been spending through the duration of the lockdown. In this chart, we have household spending across categories on the x-axis. The y-axis shows the net increase, i.e. the percentage of households increasing spend each week, less the percentage of households decreasing spend each week. We have been tracking this week on week for the last 5 weeks, and as the dashed line shows, there was initially a net decline in pretty much all categories except for staples, grocery, and hygiene. Healthcare was relatively more resilient as compared to the other sectors. And as the weeks have gone by, we have actually seen some signs of recovery with the signs of relaxation of the lockdown. There has been a 15 percentage point positive move in the percentage of households increasing spend each week. This is the upward arrow from the thin red line of week 4 to the thick red line of week 5. As we see this improvement in net increase for healthcare, we also see Spatial's trends open up. As we can see in the chart on the top, the green line of rural has a significantly higher, almost 35 percentage points higher, net increase as opposed to metros, and other urban has a 20 percentage points higher net increase than metros. Not surprisingly, and as the chart on the bottom shows, access is actually a very big issue there. Access is an issue for almost 56% of households in metros decreasing the spend, whereas it's 40% for rural households decreasing spend and 24% for other urban households decreasing spend. To look at the potential time for recovery, and with all of the caveats that Nikhil mentioned around China being more salaried versus India being more self and casual labor, This is the data that we looked in terms of health-seeking behavior in China. With a spike in COVID cases and measures to suspend non-acute health services in January, patient visits had fallen by 60% in February 2020. As the situation in China has improved, they improved by 20% in March and a further 20% in April. So really over a 2-month time period, patient visit volumes were up to about 80% of what they were in the previous year. Moving on to the third and the fourth behaviors of patient and HCPs, even before COVID, there were some factors which were changing HCP behavior. India was an unhealthy nation with the tsunami of NCDs and the simultaneous effects of communicable diseases being felt on the ground. This was increasing the complexity of patient care. Added to this was the fact that patient behaviors were much more demanding and they demanded convenience in addition to quality of care. And while the patient and the disease environments were becoming more challenging, there was also erosion in the doctor's prescription autonomy through the emergence of new stakeholders like insurers, formularies, and larger pharmacists. On the positive side, almost all doctors believed that it was part of their responsibility to bring healthcare costs under control and believed that digital tools and clinical decision support tools were actually having a fairly positive impact on care quality. COVID has amplified and accelerated these behavior changes and the nature of interactions between doctors and patients. The chart on the left shows that COVID has catalyzed a massive increase in online consultation and telemedicine across a range of developed and emerging markets. Geisinger in the US and Ping An in China have seen dramatic increases of 500% plus in a couple of months. Others like MyDoc and HelloDoc in Southeast Asia have also seen 100 to 150% increases on a monthly basis. We are also seeing the same trends play out in India. 1mg in mid-April, which was when we had last looked at this, was doing roughly 3,000 consultations across 20 specialties on a daily basis. And that was almost a 300% growth over a couple of weeks. Others like Practo and MedLife have shown a similar increase in the current base of users. Patients have also changed their purchasing habits. Most e-pharmacies are seeing a monthly order increase of anywhere between 30 to 50% during the lockdown. And a couple of other factors have also helped. There has been a surge in B2C demand, certainly, and some initial issues around fulfillment in the e-pharmacies, those have now been resolved. There were constraints of seeking offline consultations, and this also helped the demand surge. Players like Medline, which depended for offline mechanisms for almost 30 to 40% of their new demand, actually saw a slump. Challenges in the cash environment in the physical trade and clarity on the regulatory side also helped e-pharmacies. And last, there were some reductions in the discount-driven customer acquisition strategy that had been followed so far. Players believe that the need for discounts has reduced. However, aggressive discounting is something that may very well return post-COVID, just given the number of players that are fighting it out for a slice of the online pie. These patient and doctor behaviors are things that are likely to stick. And we look at data from China to see how they have sustained post-lockdown. If you see at the pre-COVID normal in the dark gray, the COVID spike in the red, and the post-COVID scenario in the light gray, you will notice that digital health apps, which had increased by almost 80% from an index of 1 to 1.8, fell down to only 1.7 in the controlled recovery phase. And this has been actually the one which has sustained the change the most. There is also another interesting learning from the evolution of this space in China. If you look at the chart on the left-hand side, the entry of horizontal players like JD Health or Ali Health led to them gaining share in the online pharmacy space quite rapidly. This was facilitated by the fact that they had a lower customer acquisition cost, which could get amortized over a much larger customer base, a higher brand recognition, and superior supply chain and technological capabilities. Players like Triple One, which were, however, able to pivot on a dime, grew to building a significant scale in the B2B business. They set up fulfillment centers in 300 plus cities across 31 provinces and continued to see significant growth. As a pharma company, however, one thing was clear. One was seeing scale players in both the final retail space as well as the intermediate distribution spaces. While there has been some increase in downtrading in the initial weeks of the lockdown, the latest data actually shows that downtrading is actually reducing and showing a marginal decline from 17% to 14%. However, access remains a significant driver of reduced spend, with healthcare being actually relatively less impacted by current income. Going back to the earlier charts, which show that it has been more resilient vis-a-vis some of the other categories that we have looked at. At this stage, what I want you to do is also get into a little bit of an engagement and getting some feedback from all of you in terms of these 6 behaviors that we spoke about. What's your sense of how permanent are they going to be, and what is likely to be a temporary in crisis situation? So if you could go back to the same link of polev.com/BainCons and then give in your responses to this particular question. So it does feel like that, consistent with what you were answering in the beginning, that, most people actually expect that this will be flat as compared to last year. And we are, I think we are probably evenly split in terms of, whether it will see a reduction or an increase. And there is at least a percentage of the population which is growing, which actually feels that we will see a significant increase in healthcare spend as we come out of the lockdown and the pandemic situation. Forward to the next question. This is really around the time to recovery, and how long do you think that it will take the sector to get back to the 10 to 12% growth that we have been hovering around? Excellent. So I would say that, again, this does seem to be along with the fact that, this is a more resilient sector, we are also a little bit more optimistic, I think, in terms of the time that it will take to recover. And we are saying anywhere that, the bulk of it, which is about 67%, are saying that between 6 to 18 months, by that time, we will be able to get back to the growth rates that we want to see for the sector. This is in terms of actually thinking about the points around digital engagement and the transformation that we might end up seeing in our sector. How important do you think that this will become? think again anywhere between 66 to 70%, which are actually saying that this will be either fairly or very important going forward. From a channel perspective, how important will online end up becoming? Slightly less so than the digital one, I guess, but still very high at 56 plus 22% overall. And the last question, which is really around, down trading is something that, given the overall macro situation, is going to play out. How much do you think this is going to be relevant for pharma? Okay, so while we do expect growth to come back and growth to come back relatively quickly, we do expect that there will a significant number, actually 70% or thereabouts, actually feel that there is going to be a down trading in the space. Thank you. Thank you for that engagement and that feedback. To summarize, the metabolic rate of change in the healthcare ecosystem and in the behaviors of stakeholders, whether it be doctors, patients, or channel partners, that has significantly changed in the last few weeks. Trends and behaviors that were evolving earlier have been catalyzed into becoming more mainstream in just 6 or 7 weeks. These behaviors, which have been catalyzed in moments of truth, are likely to end up being more sticky. So what does this mean for companies such as yourselves? We would assert 5 implications for the new playbook. 1, there is a heightened awareness regarding health and health-seeking behavior. We as a sector have an opportunity to capitalize on this changing pattern of consumption and drive both improvement in health outcomes as well as growth of the sector. This health-seeking behavior is likely to be broad-based. So we should look at how can we unlock demand from new regions and new consumers. Democratization of healthcare by going beyond the larger cities, by going beyond the specialists, is actually going to be quite critical. We have to engage with patients beyond just the immediate episode of care and engage with them, throughout their disease journey. Doctors are going to remain important, of course, but we have to, as a sector, look beyond the HCP and increase engagement with other prescription influencers and auxiliary stakeholders. And last but not the least, we have to build omni-channel capabilities and new routes to market. Now, these implications are not comprehensive, and neither are they going to be uniformly applicable to all of you. And to I think the theme that Satya you were laying out in the beginning around reborn and reimagine, we would assert that the last 6 to 7 weeks have really been a whirlwind, and individuals and organizations have moved very quickly on a number of dimensions to protect the business. Going back to running the business in the same way is going to be counterproductive. This is a time to reset and see what we have learned from the crisis. In the fog of COVID, I would also say that there has been a multitude of signals of how the world is changing. Sometimes these signals have been contradictory, and sometimes they have been weak signals. There will be, as we go back to the some semblance of normalcy, many things to act on as an organization. Our job as leaders is going to be to identify the 3 to 4 big ideas that are important, that are likely permanent, and also relevant to your organization so that you can give them the boost to shape the future. And with that, this is a thank you from Nikhil and me.
Thank you very much, Nikhil and Parijat. In fact, an outstanding presentation and highly research-based and based on a lot of evidence. So it is a great insight on the consumer behavior. OPPI started this series from the supply side. That was the first session which we had. Then we had the session on the talent side. And now we are having the session on the behavior side, because at the end of the day, it is the demand, it is the patient who will help us to navigate this journey during COVID times. So I will like to thank you at the very outset for an outstanding presentation, and that will help us to understand the demand side of the equation, which is fundamental for sustainability of the organization. So thank you very much, Nikhil, and thank you, Parijat. I will request all of you to write down your questions. We are looking forward for very exciting questions because this is all customer side of the organization, and patient is the center of everything what we do. First question which I would like to start, given the changing times, given the uncertainty, what are the accelerators and what are the derailers as far as the demand side of the equation is concerned, based on the extensive work which you have done and based on your learnings in China? Both to Parijat and Nikhil.
Thank you, Sudarshan, and I'll start, and then Nikhil, you can add on. I think for me the biggest accelerator is really in terms of health-seeking behavior by households. I think there is a significantly higher awareness, not just of curative care, but also of the need for preventive care and wellness. And I think that individuals, if you are able to actually sustain even a fraction of this health-seeking behavior, into the future, I think that will open up dramatic opportunities in terms of how companies can tap into that space and how we can have a much more healthier India. So that to me is number one. The second, I think, is that with online, and we are likely to see a democratization of care beyond extending far beyond the usual geographies and the usual top of the income pyramid kind of populations, both on the patient side as well as on the HCP side. These will present some new models of how we want to engage with those populations. But I think the democratization of care is the second potential accelerator that could end up happening for this particular sector. The third, which is more of an enabler, I think is really the digital transformation that needs to happen and is already happening in the external ecosystem, which companies in the healthcare and the pharmaceutical and biotech space can actually leverage to make sure that they are able to capitalize on this opportunity. In terms of potential derailers, I would just go back to the overall macro environment that Nikhil painted right in the beginning. I think there is certainly a fair bit of uncertainty around just how deep and severe will be the shock, the income shock, the savings shock for multiple households. And I think that is a potential derailer for sure. And the second thing, which is less of a derailer, I think, but more of something that we in the space have to navigate, is changes in the industry structure and changes in the profit pool that will happen as we see some realignment between consolidation, between new players coming in, between more scale happening. There is certainly going to be some realignment, and that players and leaders have to capitalize on that.
And Nikhil, anything
that you would add?
Just one point to accentuate is that if India was not a single entity earlier, it will fragment into even smaller entity with respect to consumer behavior as we go forward. So Parijat mentioned WIMI, which is winning in many Indias. We have to, as a firm and as an industry, absolutely understand winning in many Indias is not about having different types of sales approaches in different parts of the country. It's actually about, having different types of, both the product portfolio, thinking about the physician engagement, how do you actually prioritize your messaging, etc. All of that aspect which has to be taken into account. And that's going to be even more important because the levels of spends and the habit changes that happen in, let's say, a Surat or a Pune are very different from what they happen in a Midnapur or Coimbatore, so to say. That's something that as an industry we have to absolutely give more emphasis to.
So thank you very much, Parijat and Nikhil. There are questions on winning in many Indias. Nikhil, Ojha and Bala, they have been asking the question. And democratization of healthcare, all of us have been pursuing it. What will require to win in beyond metros? Because will it digital intervention or what kind of other interventions which will help to accelerate the process of democratization of healthcare? That is a very important question. And that's a new thought which is emerging from this presentation, that COVID situation will lead to democratization and the companies, good companies, need to capitalize. Parijat and Nikhil, thoughts by both of you on this.
Sure. So I think the approaches that will be followed will have to be different. And I think that to the last point I was making, these trends will not be uniformly applicable to different companies. I think companies need to make a determination of what is the most relevant for approach for their companies, given their strengths, their unique capabilities and assets. Having kind of said that there is going to be no one approach, I think there are going to be some common themes around this for sure. And the common themes that we have seen are going to be around, how do you go and engage with a much larger group of specialists, a much larger group of HCPs beyond specialists. And there has to be a new approach towards that. It cannot be based on the approaches of the past. That cost to serve is not just not going to be sustainable. So there will be more omni-channel approaches to how do you engage with a much larger group of of HCPs. I think there will be a significant change in terms of how distribution and supply chains work. We have seen some very innovative partnerships come up during the duration of the last 6 weeks, where very non-conventional partnerships have been struck to make sure that products reach consumers. How these will play out in a post-COVID world to actually ensure that we are getting the throughput into regions beyond the top urban centers, and we are ensuring product availability, we are ensuring product quality. That is again going to be a fairly important element in terms of just different go-to-market and distribution approaches. I think the third piece from a healthcare perspective that I would say is that there is an opportunity for a dramatic increase in terms of diagnosis and treatment rates in this country. Across multiple and almost every disease area, there are just huge drop-offs that we see in diagnosis and treatment. I think how we capitalize on these to make sure that we are able to drive those, whether it's partnerships with private sector diagnostics, whether it's getting included in Ayushman, whether it's working with nursing homes who are a part of Ayushman, whether it's working really with public health organizations, etc. I think my sense is that there are going to be a multiplicity of approaches that we will see in terms of how we are able to drive up patient diagnostic and treatment rates. Nikhil, from a consumer perspective, I'm sure you would have looked at this. So any elements on how the consumer sector has been able to democratize its offering and its reach into the multiple parts of India?
Yes, Parijat, and most of the stories are well chronicled. Whether it was the low unit price pack, whether it was making sure that the sub-stockist-led passive distribution actually reached not just the smaller towns, but pretty much, except for the last 100,000 villages, all of the villages also. That success story has been really done by the FMCG world significantly in India. I do want to go back to this point that you talked about, which was the underdiagnosis part. As the industry, as the pharmaceuticals industry, we really have to seize this moment and ask ourselves, what am I going to do to increase the salience in people's mind about the importance of prevention and the importance of early intervention in any disease? Remember, again, I said that this is a moment of flux, and if you want to truly expand the market beyond looking at share in the currently diagnosed market, etc., there will never be another time like this, at least in our working lifetime, to say that I'm going to own this therapy area. I'm going to increase the awareness upstream in the funnel rather than wait to take share from the narrow part of the funnel, which is already in play.
This is an excellent thought, Nikhil and Parijat, that what we are trying to say, it is an opportunity, it is moment of truth to democratize the healthcare. And what, Parijat, you have been talking about is looking beyond the pill and start looking at diagnosis and look at the whole patient funnel to leverage the opportunity at this moment. Thank you very much for this great insight, both Nikhil and Parijat. Going back to the same question and slightly dwelling deep into it, the point which you are making based on your data, Nikhil, is that India being the economy where self-employment is high, saving rate is impacted because of COVID. Do you think the recovery happening in India at a slower pace in healthcare, is the healthcare immune or inelastic to the trends which are there in the macroeconomics? What is your experience from other markets of the world?
So I'll come to the experience, Sudarshan, from the other market, but let me tackle the data head on by reminding that, yes, it is a largely self-employed and casual wage economy. So overall consumption is indeed going to get depressed. There is no question about that. We have been talking to the relevant people at Niti Aayog and government about this for about 3 weeks now. But it's only 2 days ago that you would have seen that Nomura has projected a -5% GDP growth for this year. So a GDP contraction of 5%, which is not a number that any one of us have seen in our working lifetimes ever. That said, that's the aggregate number. Within the household consumption basket, health and health-related spends are going to increase in salience. So from our industry perspective, this is going to be one of those points in time where even if the overall ship is in choppy waters, we are in the safest part of the ship. So our ask is going to be, how do we make ourselves, make ourselves do things which is going to make this habit sustain even when the sun comes up on the rest of the economy. That's the challenge for our industry in this year, which is to say that, yes, I am going to be more salient. Yes, people on the whole will have less to spend, but they will direct a larger part of their spending towards me. And third, this is not just about this year. This is about setting in place new behaviors for many years to come. And to that extent, all that I would point your attention to is that, if you look at any of the other parts of the world, now such a global simultaneous pandemic is not something, thank God, that has happened in the past. But we can draw on analogs about similar situations in which other industries such as insurance, such as mobility, etc., have expanded because of an exogenous shock that has happened to the economy in different parts of the world. So that's the analog that you can use to say that, yes, others have gone through a similar exogenous shock, and what they have done to freeze new habits has been the determinant of whether that upswing remains locked in or it goes back to the normal before the pandemic happened?
That's great because what we need to focus on is how do we get more salience of healthcare in our overall things. And that is also evident from the last question, Parijat, which you asked, that still most 67% believe that within 6 to 18 months, our industry will get back to the normal. The question related to it, and is a very pertinent question from everyone's mind who is attending this. You said that it took around 2 months' time to get patients back to the doctor. And that is a question which is perhaps is there in everyone's mind. Our field force is working now in the field, particularly in green zone. What will take our doctors to get back to work, and what will take patients to get back to the doctors at this moment? Because that has got implications for growth.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so the China experience was indeed that it took 2 months for about 80% of the patient volumes to come back in. But that's, that was the experience from China. I do think that, we should also look at the other learnings from China, i.e. that doctors and patients adopted teleconsultation and telemedicine like they've never kind of done before. So it was really the charts that we showed, which was Ping An actually showing a 500% increase in teleconsults over in a span of a few months, or the digital health apps really going from an index of 1 pre-COVID to an index of 1.7 post-lockdown. See, physical distancing is something that is going to be the norm, at least for some time until treatments and vaccination etc becomes more there's more clarity around those elements. Certainly elements around meeting multiple reps from multiple companies, uh, patients spending wait time in a doctor's clinic, any avoidable kind of situations like this are really going to be very significant pain points, which will push more and more, both doctors and patients actually into more of an omni-channel environment. And I think that that is actually, going to be core to being able to come back fairly quickly, because those norms of physical distancing and care will need to be taken for some more time to come. And people and companies who are able to actually do that, omni-channel engagement, are likely to end up actually seeing the benefit of that.
So thank you very much, Nikhil, and thank you very much, Parijat. Great insights. What you are saying is healthcare industry offers better opportunity and more opportunity to democratize, use the opportunity of omni-channel engagement, use the opportunity of digital intervention, and get back to the normal growth. And the time what you are talking, if we play our strategic initiative well, we can get back to the normal 6 to 18 months time. And it is each company which have to decide their own playbook. At this, I would like to close and would like to thank both Nikhil and Parijat for outstanding insights, a lot of evidence. And if we go through again once back, there is a lot of outcome which can be initiated based on this. I'd like to thank Satya, OPPI, KG, and all who have worked for this. It is a great work. And also I'd like to thank all people in the field, factories who are making things happen and making difference to the patient. Over to you, Anand, KG.
Thanks, Sudarshan. Parijat and Nikhil, I think an extraordinary and thought-provoking presentation, which I am sure those who are there in this call and webinar is they are going to start thinking the way that we need to operate in a different perspective from what we were doing in the past. An outstanding presentation. My sincere thanks to both of you, Parijat and Nikhil. It was just an extraordinary presentation. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Satya for taking the lead in organizing this webinar, which is changing customer sentiments and implication for new playbook. I think, as I said earlier, every one of us now will start thinking, how do I create my new strategy given the new behavior of the customer? How should I, position myself in order to be successful? Extraordinary. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Sudarshan Jain for moderating this session in such a professional manner. He himself is a marketing guru in the pharma industry, and for a fantastic job done, Sudarshan. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the OPPI members, IPA members, and IDMA members who have participated in this in large numbers to learn from your experience, the global experience from other industries as well. Also, thanks to the intelligent team and also my colleague Prabha and Bhavna, who have been working at the back end, to ensure that the technology works, that people are able to see your presentation, as well as the poll goes on in a proper manner, and also are able to hear you in a nice way. So I think overall a wonderful job done. I also take this opportunity, as very nicely put by Sudarshan. I think all the stakeholders, during this crisis period have really, stretched themselves, whether it is doctors through telemedicine, whether it is patients, again, adapting to the new technology, the supply chain trying to reach the medicines, the government helping to support. I think it has been a great demonstration of collaboration that has happened during this crisis time, which in itself is a huge behavioral change. Okay, it's a massive behavioral change. The type of calls that we are having with government, we have never heard of. Sudarshan, I think you will, agree with me. It's fantastic collaboration that we are seeing, and we hope that these type of, changes that are having in behavior will move in the positive direction at the end of the day, benefit the patients. We will be having a next webinar, which I think will dovetail with what you have led, Parijat and Nikhil. The next webinar is on telemedicine impacting the health of the industry. Okay, you talked a lot about it. We are going to have some experts in the telemedicine space coming and speaking about it, which is on the 19th of May at 12 p.m. And this will be the fourth webinar that will be jointly conducted by OPPI, IPA, as well as IDMA. And we welcome every one of you to participate in this. Once again, with a big thanks to all of you for your active participation, and thanks to Nikhil and Parijat for anchoring this session. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.